In the jagged silence of the Colorado Rockies, where pine shadows stretch like ancient sentinels and the wind whispers secrets through abandoned ski jumps, the mystery of Morgan Salazar and his young wife Frances still hangs like a ghostly shroud. He was no ordinary man, but a property dealer tainted by blood, scandal, and whispered ties to cartels. She, a woman drawn to him by love or fate, vanished beside him. Their luggage resurfaced years later, scrawled with two chilling words: "Revenge taken." Was it murder, betrayal, or escape? The mountains remember, even when men forget. Morgan Salazar was the kind of man people spoke of in whispers. At 45, he carried the aura of wealth and influence, but beneath it lay a darker legend. Born in Lima, Peru, he came from modest roots but learned early that power was more valuable than honesty. In the 1990s, he entered the booming property market, first flipping houses, then entire neighborhoods. By the early 2000s, his name was tied to multi-million-dollar real estate developments, stretching from Miami to Denver. But those deals were not built on clean foundations. Prosecutors claimed his success was the result of money laundering, cartel connections, and illegal trafficking. For years, rumors swirled that Morgan's construction sites doubled as drop points for narcotics and cash, hidden behind the brick and mortar of his empire. In 2005, the law finally caught up with him. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for laundering money and facilitating cartel operations. It should have ended his career. Instead, it became a footnote. With uncanny speed, appeals were filed, judges shifted, and key witnesses vanished. After only 18 months, Morgan was free, smiling as he left the courthouse, promising to rebuild his empire. The message was clear. Morgan wasn't just another criminal, he was untouchable. His enemies fumed, but they also feared him. Those who spoke against him tended not to last long. Some lost businesses, some lost reputations, and a few lost their lives. 2 years later, in 2007, his arrogance nearly brought him down again. Prosecutors accused him of orchestrating a murder for hire linked to a rival developer. The case shook the city. Reporters splashed his face across headlines, calling him a kingpin hiding behind luxury suits. A judge handed him a 30-year sentence. But once again, the iron bars could not hold him. Within 2 months, witnesses recanted, evidence was withdrawn, and Morgan walked free. Some said he bribed officials, others said he threatened the opposition into silence. To those watching, the truth mattered less than the result. Morgan Salazar was a man who could bend the law to his will. By 2008, he was back in business. His property dealings became bolder, more aggressive, and far more dangerous. Beneath the glass towers and mountain retreats he sold to the wealthy, investigators claimed he was laundering millions for cartels stretching from Peru to Mexico. Morgan had become both a businessman and a shadow broker of crime. Yet strangely, his personal life was empty. He was divorced with 2 children who rarely saw him, and though women moved in and out of his life, none stayed for long. That changed in 2007 when he met Frances Hale. Frances was 33, a social worker from a small Midwestern town. She was intelligent, driven, and carried herself with quiet grace. Friends described her as someone who believed deeply in second chances. That belief became dangerous when she met Morgan at a charity gala in Denver. She had read about him in the papers, of course, everyone had, but in person he was magnetic. His charm disarmed her, his stories of rising from nothing fascinated her, and despite his reputation, she saw something more, something she thought she could save. To her friends, Morgan was a storm she should have avoided, but to Frances, he was a man who deserved to be understood. They began dating in 2007, cautiously at first, but Morgan pursued her with relentless energy. Flowers, dinners, whispered promises of a better future. Frances tried to reconcile the man she knew with the villain painted by the press. "They don't know him like I do," she often told her sister. By December 2009, she married him, convinced that love could rewrite his past. To outsiders, it was shocking. To Morgan, it was perfect. Having Francis at his side softened his image, giving him an air of respectability he never managed on his own. But Francis was not as naive as she appeared. Though she loved him, she was not blind to his secrets. She noticed the late-night phone calls in Spanish, the sudden trips to Miami and Mexico, the way he silenced conversations when she entered the room. Slowly, she began keeping notes, dates, places, names she overheard. Some believe she did this out of fear, preparing a safety net should his empire collapse. Others insist she had already begun cooperating with federal agents, building a case from within. Whether she was an innocent caught in his world or a quiet informant remains uncertain, but by the time they planned their fateful hiking trip in 2010, Frances had secrets of her own. Morgan's enemies grew restless as the decade turned. Former partners accused him of betrayal. Political figures remembered his threats during the 2007 trial. Cartel leaders whispered of millions missing from their accounts. Even his ex-wife, who filed the lawsuit accusing him of supplying illegal drugs, sharpened her knives. He was a man surrounded by wolves, each waiting for their chance to strike. Yet Morgan moved forward as if he were untouchable, confident that he could outplay anyone, even fate. It was against this backdrop, power, betrayal, and hidden motives, that Francis and Morgan set out for the mountains of Colorado in June 2010. To their friends, it was a simple 5-day hiking trip. To Morgan, it was a temporary escape before the storm of lawsuits and hearings. But to those who knew his past, it was the last place he was ever seen alive. By June 2010, Morgan Salazar was once again circling the courts, juggling lawsuits and criminal investigations that threatened to finally break through the armor of influence he had worn for years. His ex-wife's accusations of drug trafficking loomed like a storm cloud, while federal investigators quietly prepared to pull him into another hearing scheduled for July. Yet, in typical fashion, Morgan refused to face his troubles head-on. Instead, he announced to Francis and a circle of close friends that they would take a hiking trip into the Colorado Peaks, a rugged stretch of mountains known for pine forests, sheer cliffs, and trails that often turned treacherous without warning. 5 days, he told them, 5 days to breathe before the circus starts. His tone made it sound less like a vacation and more like a challenge, as though he were daring the world to catch him. The group consisted of 6, Morgan, Francis, and 4 longtime companions from his business and social circles. They carried expensive gear, cameras, and rations, arriving with the kind of energy more suited to a weekend at a ski lodge than a trek into wild country. At first, the trip unfolded like a postcard. The days were long and bright, the pine trees standing like watchtowers against the blue sky, and the mountains echoing with birdsong and wind. Around the campfire, stories flowed, laughter filled the night air, and even Morgan seemed lighter, almost human. He cracked jokes, cooked sausages over the flames, and spoke about his children with surprising tenderness. Frances, however, appeared more reserved. She smiled for the group photos, leaned into Morgan when the others watched, but when his eyes wandered elsewhere, her expression tightened. She seemed distant, as if her mind were somewhere far beyond the mountains. One of the friends later recalled how Frances often slipped away from the group to take calls, her voice lowered, her back turned. At the time, it seemed unimportant. Later, investigators would wonder if those conversations were with family or with someone building a case against her husband. On the 3rd day, the mood began to shift. They had hiked since morning, crossing ridges and narrow paths that overlooked valleys cut deep into the stone. By noon, tensions were visible. Morgan had grown restless, walking ahead of the group, turning often to look at Francis as though he suspected something unsaid hung between them. She lagged behind, staring at the mountains with a kind of weary sadness. When they stopped for lunch near a clearing, one of the friends overheard them whispering sharply to each other, their voices low but intense. "You don't understand the danger you're in," Morgan muttered, his jaw clenched. Francis responded with something softer, her words swallowed by the wind, but her tone carried the weight of defiance. By evening, the group made camp near the edge of the forest. the sun slipped behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. They built a fire, cooked, and passed around a flask of whiskey. For a while, the laughter returned, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Around midnight, when most of the group had settled into their tents, Morgan and Francis announced they would take a shortcut trail back toward the lodge, where the trip would eventually end. "We'll meet you tomorrow," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and though the others urged them not to wander off in the dark, he brushed their concerns aside. Francis stood beside him, her flashlight beam cutting through the trees, her face unreadable. Together, they disappeared into the forest, leaving only the echo of their footsteps fading into the night. At first, no one panicked. Morgan was known for his stubborn independence, and Francis often followed where he led. But when dawn broke and they were still not returned, unease turned to dread. The group retraced the trails, shouting their names into the wilderness. By midday, they called for help. Search and rescue teams arrived within hours, deploying dogs, helicopters, and volunteers. They scoured ravines, rivers, and ridges, combing every path the couple could have taken. Not a trace was found. The campsite where they were last seen held no signs of struggle, no discarded belongings, no broken branches or footprints leading away. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The investigation widened. Detectives interviewed the four friends again and again, pressing for inconsistencies. Why had Morgan insisted on leaving at midnight? Why did Francis follow so quietly? Was it a lover's quarrel that ended in violence, or did someone lure them away? Rumors exploded in the press. Some claimed Morgan had staged the disappearance to escape the courts. Others whispered that the cartels had finally claimed their debt, executing him in the wilderness and taking Francis with him. A darker theory suggested Francis herself might have betrayed him, and that he, upon discovering her secrets, silenced her before vanishing. None of it could be proven. Weeks turned into months. Posters of the missing couple were tacked to bulletin boards across the state, their smiling faces frozen in time, staring out at strangers. Yet no bodies, no gear, no conclusive evidence ever surfaced. The wilderness gave nothing back. To the public, it became a haunting riddle, the property dealer who dodged justice for years and the woman who believed she could save him, gone without a trace under the wide, merciless sky of the Colorado peaks. 2 years passed after Morgan and Francis vanished into the Colorado wilderness, and the case had already begun to fade from headlines, reduced to a cold mystery buried under newer scandals and tragedies. Their families still clung to hope, especially Francis's sister, who traveled each summer to the mountains, leaving flowers and notes at the trailhead. Morgan's ex-wife, however, remained bitter and unyielding, convinced that he had staged his disappearance to avoid facing her lawsuits. The police, despite multiple expeditions, had uncovered nothing. No clothing, no backpacks, not even a footprint that could be tied to the missing couple. It was as though the earth had swallowed them whole. Then, in late autumn of 2012, hikers stumbled across something strange beneath the rotting frame of an abandoned ski jump, half collapsed and forgotten in a ravine not far from one of the side trails the couple had been suspected of taking. At first, it seemed like the usual debris, a broken crate, scraps of plastic, and branches carried by the wind. But as the hikers looked closer, they saw something chilling, a leather strap poking out from beneath the snow-matted leaves. They brushed it aside and uncovered a weathered rucksack, its zippers rusted, its fabric stained but unmistakably intact. When investigators arrived, they discovered not one, but 2 bags, buried beneath the remnants of wood and rusted steel. Inside were items long assumed lost: Francis's journal, Morgan's wallet, a set of keys, a cracked wristwatch, and a map of the hiking trails marked in red ink. There were also personal belongings: lipstick, a pair of sunglasses, a child's drawing folded into Morgan's notebook. Each item felt like a ghost, an echo of lives cut off abruptly. But the most haunting discovery lay within Francis's journal. Waterlogged and torn, most of its pages were unreadable, the ink blurred into black clouds. Yet on one surviving page, scrawled in hurried, uneven letters, were two words that froze investigators: "Revenge taken." The phrase sent shockwaves through the case, reigniting the public's fascination and suspicion. What did it mean? Some believed Francis had written it in her final moments, a desperate clue pointing to Morgan's enemies. Others argued Morgan himself might have scrawled the words, staging the scene to mislead investigators. There was even speculation that a third party had planted the bags beneath the ski jump years later, leaving the cryptic note as a taunt. The fact that the ski jump was not far from the original search zone raised further questions. How had dozens of teams missed it before? Was it simply overlooked or deliberately hidden until the time was right? The discovery brought Morgan's past roaring back into the spotlight. Prosecutors, rivals, and former associates all had reasons to want him dead. Old cases resurfaced in the press: the 2005 conviction, the 2007 murder trial, the cartel ties, the lawsuits. Every thread of his history seemed to connect to someone who might have whispered, "Revenge taken." Even his children, now teenagers, were dragged unwillingly into the storm, facing reporters who asked if they believed their father was dead or hiding. Francis's family, meanwhile, clung to the hope that the journal meant she had fought to the very end, leaving behind her final testimony. But others began to question her role as well. If Francis had indeed been gathering evidence against Morgan, as rumors suggested, had she been silenced for betrayal? Or had she turned on him herself? The police investigated every angle, but the evidence only deepened the fog. Forensic tests revealed nothing conclusive. The bags showed signs of weathering consistent with years in the elements, yet there were no bloodstains, no DNA from outside parties, nothing to prove foul play. The note in the journal could not be dated precisely. It might have been written during the trip or planted later. Witnesses came forward with wild claims. Some swore they had seen Morgan in Mexico. Others insisted Francis was spotted boarding a flight to South America. None of these leads held. The only truth investigators could cling to was that Morgan and Francis walked into the mountains and never walked out. The abandoned ski jump became a shrine of speculation. Tourists hiked to it, leaving candles and photographs. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail online, arguing endlessly over whether Morgan was murdered, hiding, or alive somewhere under a new name. Conspiracy theorists tied the phrase "revenge taken" to cartels, rival developers, even shadowy political groups. For the detectives who had worked the case from the beginning, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a curse. It reopened every wound, but provided no closure. If anything, it made the mystery darker, more unsolvable. The wilderness had given back a handful of belongings, but not the truth. The discovery of the luggage beneath the abandoned ski jump did more than revive a cold case. It reignited a firestorm of speculation that consumed the press, the courts, and every corner of the public imagination. Morgan Salazar had not been an ordinary missing person. He was a man whose name carried the stench of scandal, violence, and power. Investigators quickly drew up a list of possible suspects, each one tied to his labyrinthine past. First were the cartels. For years, whispers had circulated about Morgan's dealings with narcotics routes, disguised as property developments, money funneled through construction firms, and land exchanges that served as fronts for trafficking. The phrase, "revenge taken," fit neatly into that narrative. Perhaps an old debt had been collected, brutally and without mercy. Then came his political enemies. Morgan's habit of strong-arming judges, bribing officials, and exploiting connections within both the ruling party and the opposition had left him despised in multiple camps. To some, the discovery of the bags seemed less like a cartel execution and more like a political hit, staged to send a message. Beyond these, there were more personal suspects, his ex-wife chief among them. She had fought him in court for custody and assets, accusing him of drug trafficking just weeks before the trip. To the tabloids, the idea of a vengeful ex orchestrating his downfall was irresistible. Yet there was another possibility that unsettled everyone: Frances herself. Some speculated she had grown weary of living under the shadow of a man hunted by enemies. Perhaps she had planned to leave him, and, caught in the web of his past, found herself either complicit in his end or the victim of his paranoia. The police made several arrests over the following year, though none held. A former business partner of Morgan's, linked to a cartel front in New Mexico, was taken into custody after rumors surfaced that he had confessed in a bar to finally shutting Salazar up. He denied it under questioning, and with no physical evidence tying him to the ski jump discovery, he was released. Months later, 2 men in Denver with minor cartel ties were swept up, accused of transporting evidence away from the crime scene. The arrests drew headlines but collapsed in court. In one dramatic moment, Frances's own brother was questioned after investigators discovered he had borrowed a large sum of money from Morgan just before the marriage and never repaid it. The theory was that resentment, coupled with fear of Morgan's volatility, might have driven him to violence. The family protested furiously, and no charges were filed. Each arrest was followed by press conferences, speculation, and eventually disappointment as the evidence unraveled under scrutiny. Meanwhile, the theories only multiplied. Some journalists published exposés suggesting Morgan had staged the disappearance himself, planting the Luggage later with the phrase "revenge taken" as a decoy, giving him enough time to flee the country. His Peruvian heritage fueled these claims. Sightings of a man resembling him in Cusco, Lima, and small border towns circulated widely, though none were verified. Others insisted Frances was the true victim, caught in the crossfire of a vendetta against her husband, her voice lost beneath the shadow of his infamy. The ambiguity gnawed at the public conscience. Was she a bystander, a partner, or something more dangerous? Theories painted her alternately as a secret informant gathering evidence, or as a woman who had snapped under the weight of Morgan's lies and orchestrated a final betrayal. As the years dragged on, the case became less about justice and more about myth. The abandoned ski jump turned into a morbid landmark where amateur sleuths gathered to trade theories and comb the ground for overlooked evidence. Documentaries aired on late-night television, each one claiming to reveal the truth, yet none offering closure. The suspects who had been dragged into the spotlight, business partners, cartel contacts, even Frances's own relatives, emerged scarred by suspicion, their lives permanently altered by their association with Morgan Salazar's disappearance. The authorities, pressured to deliver results, pushed for more arrests but found themselves chasing shadows. Every lead led to dead ends. Every suspect carried enough motive but lacked the proof. Through it all, the phrase scrawled in Frances's journal continued to haunt investigators. Revenge taken. Who had written it? And when? Was it Frances's dying message, Morgan's twisted performance, or the hand of someone who wanted the mystery to live forever? Each possibility carried its own sinister weight, and none could be confirmed. The case became a hall of mirrors where every suspect could be guilty, every theory could be true, and yet nothing could be proved. What began as a man and his young wife vanishing into the Colorado peaks had transformed into one of the most perplexing crime sagas in modern memory, a riddle that devoured everyone who dared to solve it. More than a decade after their disappearance, the story of Morgan and Frances had transcended the boundaries of a mere missing persons case and transformed into a cultural legend, a parable of corruption, love, and retribution woven into the rugged backdrop of the Colorado Rockies. The case lived on in countless retellings, true crime documentaries, podcasts dissecting every scrap of evidence, books written by journalists who had followed the investigation from the start, and even fictionalized thrillers loosely inspired by the couple's fate. For Morgan's enemies, the disappearance was proof that power and influence, no matter how strong, eventually crumble under the weight of justice or vengeance. For his defenders, it was a reminder of how rumors and politics can destroy a man, painting him as a villain until his enemies finally make him vanish. But what gave the story its lasting grip on the imagination was not Morgan alone. It was Frances, the woman caught in the storm. To many, she became the tragic heart of the mystery, a woman in love with a man dangerous enough to doom them both, her voice silenced but faintly preserved in the torn pages of her journal. That phrase, "revenge taken," echoed like a curse, debated endlessly on forums, podcasts, and by candlelight among amateur sleuths hiking up to the abandoned ski jump. Each generation of investigators revisited it, each coming away with a different interpretation. Was it a confession, a warning, or a cruel trick? The ambiguity was both maddening and magnetic. The legacy of the case was not confined to speculation alone. It left scars on real lives. Morgan's children grew up under the shadow of his infamy, forever haunted by the question of whether their father was murdered, hiding, or complicit in his own disappearance. Frances's family remained split, some insisting she had been innocent, others whispering she knew more than she admitted, perhaps even played a part. Detectives who had worked the case carried it with them long after retirement, unable to accept the gaping void at its center. Some confessed that in their quiet moments they dreamed of the mountains swallowing them too, carrying them into the same darkness that had taken Morgan and Frances. The ski jump site became both shrine and spectacle. Pilgrims came to light candles, leave flowers, and read aloud passages from Frances's journal as if invoking her ghost. At the same time, thrill seekers and conspiracy theorists trampled the ground, searching for clues that might connect the case to larger webs of corruption, politicians, cartel overlords, or secret deals between governments. The physical place had become a stage for myths, the decaying skeleton of the ski jump looming like a monument to unanswered questions. Even law enforcement agencies, usually cautious about unsolved mysteries, acknowledged the case had become something more than a file in their archives. Every few years they reopened it briefly, often triggered by a new supposed sighting of Morgan abroad, or a new forensic method that might wring secrets from the weathered bags. But each time the search yielded nothing, no bones, no weapons, no evidence. It was as though the mountains themselves had made a pact of silence, keeping their secrets hidden beneath snow and pine. That silence gave birth to darker theories, that Morgan, with his influence and connections, had orchestrated a disappearance so perfect it left only tantalizing fragments behind. Some claimed he lived under a new identity in Peru, pulling strings from the shadows. Others swore Frances had been the true target, punished for something Morgan had hidden, with the revenge directed not at him but at her. Each possibility was more unsettling than the last, but none could be disproven. By the time the 13th anniversary of their disappearance arrived, the case had grown into legend, part ghost story, part morality tale, part unsolvable riddle. Campfire storytellers in Colorado wove it into their tales. Hikers spoke of hearing whispers near the ski jump at night, and some swore they saw fleeting figures in the trees, a man and woman walking together but never turning their faces. In the end, the legacy of Morgan and Frances was not simply their vanishing, it was the questions left behind, the ripple effects that refused to fade. They had become symbols of how secrets devour lives, how revenge can echo across years, and how some mysteries resist every attempt to be solved. For those who had loved them, closure never came. For those who had hated Morgan, justice never felt complete. And for everyone else, the story endured because it was unsatisfying, because it resisted neat endings. The case of Morgan and Francis was not just an unsolved mystery, it was a mirror, reflecting back the fears, suspicions, and dark fascinations of everyone who gazed into it.